Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. The show has been running for over 6 years now. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today, my guest is one of the leading figures in bio and regenerative design. Carole Collet is Professor in Design for Sustainable Futures at Central St Martin's. She's also Director of Maison Zero, the CSM LVMH creative platform for regenerative luxury, and co-director of the Living Systems Lab, a research group at the same university. In 2000, she founded the Textile Futures course at CSM, which went on to become Material Futures and has spawned a string of brilliant students who are attempting to get to grips with some of the most important issues of the day. Many have appeared on this podcast. She is in many respects the grande dame of new material thinking. In fact, I'm not entirely certain why it's taken me so long to get her on the show. Carole, thank you so much for doing this. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me on your brilliant postcard series.
Oh, well, that's my complete pleasure. It's always weird reading intros out in front of people. Was that all reasonably accurate?
It was, yeah. It's quite difficult to capture what I do because I have two central roles at Central St Martin's. One is with the luxury group LVMH and one is with the Living Systems Lab, which is a more fundamental research group.
Okay, well, we will unpick that as we go through, I suspect. I mean, we have a tradition on this podcast of asking guests to describe their workshop and studios. Obviously, I'm looking on a Zoom screen or a Zoom type screen at your background, which has shelves and things. You're not in work today, I suspect.
I'm working from home today. I'm in my study in London. I'm privileged to work in a beautiful city, a forest city. And my study is facing the front garden, but it's a multifunctional space. Sometimes it becomes a workshop. Sometimes it's a study. It depends what I'm focusing on.
So how do you work, Carole? You have these two platforms or two areas at Central St Martin's. How do you toggle between the two?
Everything I do is really centered on ecology and how we can integrate ecological principles in our creative practices. When I work with Maison Zero, it's a partnership. We work directly with the environment team at LVMH. They have a very clear strategy, the Life 360 environment strategy with defined pillars for actions, objectives and targets. So that's centered on climate, biodiversity, creative circularity, transparency. And then we align our projects with their targets. We do that together with them. It's a genuine partnership. And we develop projects. We have a whole range of activities in Maison Zero, and I can discuss them a bit more in depth later. But so it's very much to really look at how creativity can foster and be a catalyst for regenerative luxury. So going beyond circularity even. And then with the Living Systems Lab, it's much more a research group, much more conventional academic research. We have 13 PhD students currently in a group. And we work more traditionally with applying for funding applications, developing research projects. And that's not for a specific client or external group. Whereas what we do with Maison Zero is really centered on creating a synergies between environmental values at LVMH and creative practice at Central St Martin's.
Okay, that's a very good breakdown of what you do. I mean, one of the things I'd quite like to get into, because we have a mixed audience on this podcast, is to jargon bust a little bit, because I always worry there's a danger that people start bandying about terms that other people kind of have a misunderstanding of or don't understand. So can we talk about biodesign initially and what biodesign means to you?
Biodesign is a field that I began to get into back in 2007, quite a long time ago now. I was very privileged to work on a project with the Medical Research Council looking at parallels between textile practice, textile language and the language of biology. And we were paired up with Nobel laureates, Nobel scientists. And this was for me my first deep dive in the world of biology. And this was really at the same time as there was a whole emergence around the notion of biomimicry, designing with living technology. That was very much a term at the time. We were looking at better ways to practice with ecology. And it was a way to get a step closer to nature, was to understand how biology functions. So biodesign is very much the integration of biological behavior, biological principles, biological fabrication tools in the design process.
Very good. Very good. And there's also a quote from you that I like, where you say that simply aiming for carbon neutrality is no longer enough. So going back to that jargon busting, and you talk about the LVMH Maison Zero platform being about regenerative luxury. What does regenerative design mean?
So the idea of regenerative design, it comes in a line of various schools of thoughts in terms of sustainable design. It's very much under the full umbrella of sustainable design, but it's getting quite complex. You have biodesign, which is a means to get a step closer to how nature makes in a cyclic system with local nutrients at ambient temperature. But then you have circular design, which is also inspired by living systems, looking into nature works in cycles and in cyclic systems. And then the idea of regenerative design really comes from the fact that over the past 30 years, we've looked at integrated sustainable principles in not just in design, but, in our societal ways of being. But the way we've tackled it was by reducing our impact on the environment. So we might lower our impact by lowering our carbon footprint or reducing our water usage, but at the same time as as developing this sustainable behavior or practice, we have really increased our carbon emission. We have depleted our biodiversity at the point of now we're reaching the 6th biodiversity extinction on the planet. So what we've done so far, if you look back historically over the past 30 years, is great. It's a momentum. There's a whole spectrum of way of practicing sustainability.
Which is fundamentally doing less bad.
Exactly. It's a great starting point, but now we need to flip it and we need to really look at rethinking completely the system so that we look at what nature needs and how we can design, whether it's architecture, products, fashion, in a way that replenishes and nurtures natural ecosystems. Practically, this means, for instance, to move away from any conventional agricultural model. If you work in fashion textiles, a lot of our fabrics and materials come from intensive agriculture. So conventional cotton is extremely toxic for the soil, for the water, for the underground water tables. It kills any insects, any birds. It's monoculture, it's intensive. So simply switching to an organic or and regenerative agricultural model means we leave space, we start to rebuild hedges, we start to restore our soil health. So it's very important for us to really look at not just doing less bad, but really looking at how can we actively use our creative practice to restore ecosystems. Whether it's restoring a forest, restoring highlands, wetlands, how do we do this? And quite often it comes from the choice of materials, but sometimes it can also be what we call a place-based. So regenerative design at its best is a place-based practice. You start with an ecosystem, you look at the depletions, the unbalance, and then you look at how you can design a product, a service, or a system that helps restore that local ecosystem. It's one of the things we're currently doing with Maison Zero, for instance. We're working with UNESCO, and we're working in the UNESCO biospheres in Bolivia. LVMH is a partner of UNESCO and a partner of Central St. Martin's, and we've decided to join forces, the three of us, to look at how we can apply regenerative design principles in a UNESCO map biosphere. And we're working with 2 different biospheres, 2 different communities, where we're looking at the challenges they have in terms of ecosystems, how we can address these challenges at the same time as supporting a local community.
And how are you going about doing that?
So I can explain a bit more. We're working with one community, is an indigenous group, the Chiman. They're based in the Pilon Lajas biosphere in Bolivia. So it's just at the beginning of the Andes. Of course, they're already confronted with massive climate change impact. So a lot of wildfires will destroy their land and their forest. There's a lot of tension locally. We know a lot of issues around cutting down forests for logging and for trees or for cattle ranching, or so they're fighting against this. But we're also looking at historically the Chiman have an incredible weaving heritage, which is disappearing. There's very little value given to traditionally woven Chiman bag, for instance. They have lost their notions of natural dyes, so they either use synthetic dyes or buy ready dyed yarns. They don't know their local heritage anymore. So we're looking at what needs to be done, and what they have, which is amazing. They are very strong in agroforestry. So that community is growing cacao, oranges, avocado, pineapple in agroforestry system. It's how they generate any income. And we're looking at now expanding that agroforestry to include textiles. So we're looking at how they can actually rediscover their heritage, redevelop their craft practice by bringing back their local natural dyes, but also by bringing back a local cotton, which comes from there, from that region of the Amazon originally. It's a cotton that grows brown naturally, which we have sourced in local villages, but they had stopped growing it. So we're bringing that back in, so they don't need to dye that cotton because it's brown already. They already grow a white cotton, but that's only for their own use. So we're trying to help them redevelop a craft practice, and we're helping them to reach a market in Bolivia. So the project we do is not for us, not for LVMH. It's everything's for them, but it's helping them developing income generating activities for the women by reviving their local heritage, but in a way that benefits local biodiversity. So using agroforestry techniques, which will combine food and textile growing at the same time.
Interesting. And tell me, what does an enormous conglomerate like LVMH derive from all this?
So learning how we do it. So this project came about because part of my mission with LVMH as a director of Maison Zero is to prototype what can be regenerative design. It's still a very emergent practice. Part of their current strategy is to really move into fully circular product for all their Maison, to become 100% eco-design product by 2030. But they also have very, very strategic biodiversity targets. So one of the objectives is to restore 5 million hectares of land, because LVMH understands everything they do comes from nature. So we cannot continue to develop product and supply chains that impact on biodiversity. So for them, learning how we can design in a way that supports biodiversity is essential. So they're using us at Maison Zero to prototype ways of doing this, so that they can learn from what works, what doesn't work, and how that could then be, informing how they conduct their own way of designing.
And do students or the people on the platform, do they go to work for the company afterwards? I'm interested to know how you affect their long-term thinking.
Yeah, so actually originally the partnership started because a lot of our graduates go to work for LVMH in many different of their maisons. So we acknowledge that and realize it made sense for them and for us to become strategic partners. So a lot of our students go there for internships, as well as to achieve various positions in the group.
And are there ever any tensions between what you and CSM want and what LVMH want as a major global brand?
I wouldn't say there is, because actually the partnership is very carefully crafted so that it's designed so that everything we agree to deliver, each objectives, has to benefit both us and LVMH. Where the tension might be more is we work at different pace. We have timetables, so we can't always respond to very, very last minute requests, for instance, which is much more common in a corporate culture. But in terms of what we deliver and how we deliver it, it's all agreed ahead. We have a 5-year contract and it's all agreed, negotiated, so we know exactly who delivers what and how we deliver it.
Because I know, for example, that products like lab-grown fur have been developed from the platform. I mean, are they now using lab-grown fur, or what's the story behind that?
So this is something we've worked on. It's been announced. You're quite correct. It's been in the public domain. And this is a collaboration between Fendi, LVMH, Imperial College, and us at Central St. Martins. However, I am not allowed to discuss where we are at in the project,
Okay.
but we are still at it.
You're still at it. Oh, good.
We will make an announcement when it's ready to made. But the project was very exciting. It was a first for Fendi and LVMH to really directly work with biodesigners and with scientists in that sense, in that capacity in relation to fashion fiber. Of course, they have a lot of research for their cosmetics. So it's a very exciting collaboration, but I cannot reveal at what stage we are at yet.
I can't twist your arm virtually, can I, Carole? Are you sure? Nobody is listening,
No.
honestly.
What I can say is that it's a great partnership. It's been a very successful collaboration, but I can't say more.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Living Systems Lab that you founded in 2013. So this is where you do your research?
Yes.
What does that entail?
So in the Living Systems Lab, it's two major focus for me. So one is to develop my own research practice, and the other is to support our PhD group. So we currently have PhD students that work across a range of subjects. Some are industry funded. So currently we have, for instance, Colorifix funding a research in printing with microbial dyes and developing a system and a framework for printing as opposed to dyeing with microbial dyes. And that PhD, that's Ruth Lloyd, who's completing this in January. We have a PhD student really looking at how we can address plastic challenges in the Philippines. So this is very much a regenerative design, place-based, looking at the issue of the culture of the sachet culture in the Philippines, so where you buy very small quantities of, staple or food, but everything is wrapped in a small sachet. And so the Philippines is one of the main contributor to plastic crisis. So he's looking at how we can actually adapt regenerative design principles for behavior change in the Philippines. So we have a whole range of really exciting PhD research in the group. And in my own work, in terms of my own practice, it's really navigating anything between biodesign to regenerative design practice. I am slightly unusual in that most researchers will commit to one organism, for instance, in biodesign. In my case, I work across plant engineering, plant species, and mycelium. Every project is an opportunity to develop a new way of making. So what I'm after in my own work is looking at how you can collaborate with another living system to explore new ways of fabrication.
When you kind of type your name into Google to research you, one project comes up time and time again, BIOLACE, which was a project you started in 2012, which was using synthetic biology to reprogram fictional plants into multi-purpose factories. So the plants would produce food at the same time as growing textiles or fabrics from their roots. So in other words, you could eat a black strawberry, which could also produce ultimately a little black dress, which is a lovely conceit. And it's also very, very beautiful. The way that these roots were growing were kind of aesthetically deeply pleasing. You were projecting that as something that could happen in 2050 back in 2012. Are we closer to achieving that now, I wonder?
Not really. I think this is, you're quite right. This is a key project. This was my first dedicated project looking at what does synthetic biology mean for us in the future. And this came about because in that project, was working with a Nobel laureate, we were having these conversations and I was saying, I'm looking at biology as being the answers to our ecological crisis. If we could make the way nature makes, and if we could actually even develop more bespoke approaches to how nature makes, that could be an interesting arena, particularly in relation to textiles. And I was working with the late Sir John Sulston at the time, who said, if you're interested in this, you should look at what's happening with synthetic biology. That term in itself was fascinating for me, a synthetic biology. And so at the time that was, a very niche area. Some people talked about it more as a living biotechnology or synthetic biology. So as you're reprogramming, you're not just tweaking an organism by changing a gene or removing a gene or adding a gene. You're actually rewriting the entire genome. And now we can do that on a computer. You can write a genome. You can effectively print the DNA. There's a DNA synthesizer that can do that. And then you can put that up in a cell, and that cell will actually fully amalgamate that genome. And at the time, I mean, you're talking this, when I first encountered that, it was 2007. And I was like, what is this? Where are we going with this? So I started reading very complex papers. I have to say I did not understand. That's a metabolic pathway. I was like, wow, this is a whole other world there. And in 2010, you may not remember, but it was a big announcement. It was, very much in the news that Craig Venter, so American scientist, had developed the first synthetic organism designed by humans on Earth. That organism was a single cell organism. It was called Cynthia. It was nicknamed Cynthia. There was a lot of discussion around the ethics of doing this. They had gone through an ethical panel, but basically that was the first time that it went beyond the theoretical potential to actually, here we go. Here's the first cell designed. It was destroyed straight away. But there was a lot of discussion around at the time. So what does this mean? And I was going to quite a lot of these scientific meetings in London. I was the only designer there. And you may look it up if you look it up, there was a roadmap for synthetic biology published by the UK. And that roadmap was only looking at the future of synthetic biology could be used to get, let's say, an algae to produce biofuel. So we are looking at potentially addressing environmental challenges by recreating organisms that actually, through fermentation, through massive bioreactors, so potentially, factories close to cities, could actually produce substances that we import from far away. So that was one idea. But the main roadmap was looking at using synthetic biology for anything to do with energy, petrol. Medicine was the other big angle, looking at can we grow, new types of medicine using this platform, these synthetic biology platforms. And nobody was talking about textiles. And I was the only one saying, but have you looked at textiles? Because actually, we could really look at what that could mean for that whole industry, which is one of the most damaging industry. And everybody was saying, no, it's not textiles, it's not related. And that's what was a trigger for me, because I was like, I need to understand how far could we go with synthetic biology for textiles? And that's how BIOLACE came about. I wanted to try and question. It was a means for me to actually understand synthetic biology as a designer. It was quite complex to understand. I'm a maker. So for me, I make sense of the world through making. So to understand a complex idea like synthetic biology, I needed to visualize, develop ideas, prototype, materialize what could that mean. And so there's a lot of development behind the BIOLACE images that you may be familiar with, but there was a lot of research in what could we do. And I was looking at because of these roadmaps, looking at 2050, I was looking, okay, so where could we be in 2050 in terms of textiles? And I was looking, of course, already we knew, we were moving to a very urban-centric species. We're now an urban species. More of us humans live in cities. That sort of turning point was in the year 2000. So if we're really living more in cities, it makes sense to actually have more and more locally based production for whatever we do, whether it's food, whether it's textiles, as opposed, to grow cotton in the middle of the States to then ship it to Indonesia to be processed to then ship it to wherever. So I was looking at that locally centric kind of production. That's where the idea of these future factories where you could grow food and textile at the same time could be an option, but this was really designed as a provocation. So it was speculative design to look at, should we go there? Is this the way to go? Relying on technology solely to get us out of this mess, because frankly, we are in a bit of an environmental mess right now. And so this was a really interesting exercise because actually it took me by surprise. Everybody wanted to exhibit that project. It went everywhere. And for me, it was more means to question, if we carry on practicing the way we make textiles right now in terms of industrial scale, intensive agriculture, where are we going to get to? Or should we look at these potential future options? So it was to trigger a point of conversation and discussion in the textile sector. And I did loads of workshops and lectures and keynotes to really wake up the whole industry to, do you realize synthetic biology is coming? Is it a good idea? Is this something we should resist, or is this something we should encourage? And for me, it was a way to question this for myself. Where do you stand when, I'm an ecologist? How do I stand as an ecologist wanting to use genomic engineering?
Where do you stand, Carole? 12, 15, 13 years on, where do you stand?
I stand at it's not a black and white rule. I think it needs to be very specific to the need. So if you look at what's happening in terms of color, for instance, in textiles, there's a lot, we know synthetic dyes are very toxic. We see a lot of river pollution, soil pollutions to do. In certain countries, legislation is not there. And so synthetic dyes not only come from the oil industry, which is an extractive industry. It's limited. It's a high carbon footprint industry. And if you look at what is the potential future next alternative, is microbial coloring. And for that, there's a massive reduction in water, no chemicals used, no need for mordant. So it's a massive benefit compared to a synthetic dye. And that's actually developed thanks to synthetic biology as well. So I think for me, it's not a black and white. It's always better. I think it depends on the context. It depends on what system we're trying to replace with these new propositions.
Hope you're enjoying the show. We've had an amazing year here at Material Matters. We launched a new fair in Copenhagen, started an online bookstore, opened a new venue for our London event, and launched our new one-day conference, Assemble, with the Bank of England, as well as recording numerous episodes of the podcast. Suffice to say, it's been busy, and we thank you all for your support. I really wanted to let you know that for 2026, we'll be returning to Gamble Dock in Christianshavn for Material Matters Copenhagen. The fair runs from the 10th to the 12th of June and is part of 3 days of design. Spaces are filling up, so if you and your company is interested in taking part, drop us a line at hello@materialmatters.design. That's hello@materialmatters.design. See you there next year. I'm going to take you back to the year 2000. I sound like a Jarvis Cocker song. And you founded the MA Textile Futures, again, at Central St Martin's, which has become Material Futures, and a huge number of graduates from that course have been guests on this podcast. What was the background to starting that hugely influential course?
So there was a course at Central St Martin's, an MA Textile Design course. And at the time, if you look back at the landscape in the UK, but also in Europe mostly, when you studied textiles, you would study according to a particular craft. So you would eventually, whether it's an undergraduate or postgraduate, specialize in a print textiles, a knit, or a weave. These are three different ways to construct and create with textiles. And for me, I wanted to turn this on its head because I wanted to come at textiles from an ecological perspective. And I also felt that we were at a real crossroad between a better awareness of the ecological implications of textile production, but at the same time, and it's quite funny to think about it now, because now we're all about AI, but in 2000, you remember, this was like, oh, how do you use internet? Mobile phones, I think we didn't even have texts yet, or it was just beginning. It was just very, very early on, the digital transformation. So there was a lot of things going on, digital transformation, ecological awareness, and I just felt that textile should be at the heart of this. Textile was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and I just felt like, well, this is what textiles could drive the next one. But we won't drive it if we carry on teaching textiles and practicing textiles just according to three crafts. So craft and making is still central, but I just felt that we needed to just rethink completely how we can actually create a space where to question the value of textiles, the making of textiles. On a master's level, you have developed your skills already. You come to do a master's because you want to develop a criticality around your practice, around your field. So instead of having this sort of traditional approach to textiles, I wanted us to question textiles in relation to ecology, to technology, science, and what I call the poetics at the time, because we don't want to lose the sense of, the aesthetic research, the dynamic of making. So that's how it was proposed. And I have to say, Central St. Martin's is an amazing place in that it's a place where, yes, our students are creative, but of course, all our academic colleagues are incredibly creatives. And traditionally, all our senior managers, our heads of college, have been very open-minded to what is next. And so, quite often when we propose something, it's not a no. It's like, okay, how could we do this? Yes, that's interesting.
I was going to ask if the management got it initially.
They did. I mean, they would not have allowed it if they hadn't.
Yeah. Did students get it when they arrived? So, I wonder.
If you look back at the year 2000, 2001, some students got it, and that's why they really wanted to come. Others were a little bit surprised by all this discussion around ecology, or, we introduced electronics, designing electronics and textiles. So I think it was a real cultural shift. Where it was a bit more challenging is more in, our friendly competitors, if I may say. I remember going to conferences speaking about textile futures, and people were saying, but it has nothing to do with textiles. What should we talk about ecology in textiles? What should we talk about, future technology in textiles? And I kind of felt like, for me, that's the only way to do it. So I'm slightly stubborn. So when I want to do something, I just get on with it. But we had, it was the right condition. I mean, it's the same when we created the MA Biodesign. It was just, okay, it's time to move. We have the research group, but it's now time to formalize this properly. And again, this was a different head of college at the time who said, yes, I understand it. We need to look into it. Of course, there's a financial implication because we wanted to set up a biology lab at Central St. Martin. So that took a bit of time to work this out. Same again when we created the MA Regenerative Design. So the idea is to look at what's coming next. We don't stand still at Central St. Martin's. We really like to look at shaping the emergence of next practices.
Well, you've been described as creating, and I quote, a disobedient design curriculum. Is disobedient a word you approve of?
Yeah, I actually have said that in a few talks. It's because, when you are creative, when you're a designer, particularly in the UK, I think the UK is very strong at this in all creative education is the first thing you learn to do is break the rules. And I just feel that we have to do the same in education. We can't just follow just the rules. You have to actually break the system. For me, we can't move into ecologically centered practices if we just tweak at the edge of the existing educational system. We need to flip it. We need to bring the biologist and the ecologist at the design table to work with designers. And that's what we've done with the MA Biodesign. We've appointed a biologist. With the MA Regenerative Design, we've appointed an ecologist. And so designers can have a conversation about ecology or biology, depending on which course they're on. And so for me, I think that's what's really important, is to look at, the fundamental environmental crisis we're in will not be resolved if we just keep tweaking systems. We need to really move to a complete reset. And that comes from education as well as from industry, as well as from legislation.
And presumably you needed to do this, and you've alluded to some of this already, because there is something fundamentally wrong with the fashion and textile industry. So what precisely are your issues with it, Carole?
Two main issues is the material extraction and transformation, which in a lot of supply chain is very disconnected, fragmented. A lot of fashion companies don't even understand completely their tier 4 supply chain. They will know their first tier 1, tier 2 potentially, but it's very, very complex supply chain, the textile industry. So, if you buy cotton from a cooperative, you don't know which fields they've been grown from. If you buy leather from a tannery, you don't know which farms they come from. So there's a lot of opacity in the entire system, which doesn't necessarily come from the fashion brands, I would say. I mean, it often comes from the actual textile suppliers way down the chain. So it's very, very complex chain, and it has always been built on, maximizing profit over the benefit of nature, over animal welfare, over nature. I mean, if you look at, again, intensive agriculture, which is how we make most of our cotton, it destroys natural systems. It's actually really unhealthy for the farmers too. So for me, the material fabrication is really problematic. And this is where I'm focusing more my expertise, material sourcing, material fabrication, transformation. The other big challenge is consumption. And I'm not an expert in that, but it's really looking at particularly the beginning of fast fashion, year 2000. That's really changed completely how people think of shopping. You might buy, 10 garments this week and you might wear one, or you might wear one for an Instagram post. That's very recent. That's, 25 years ago that behavior began. It's very difficult to kind of look back on this now. But so for me, there's this acceleration of consumption and acceleration of material production, which are very unsustainable.
Okay. Can you trace, out of interest, you say 25 years, how did that notion of fast fashion begin in that case?
So something that few people talk about, but in the year 2000, we still had a little bit of a textile industry in Europe. But we had legal agreements in place with many countries. And one of them came to an end. It was the multi-fiber agreement that ended in 2000, which meant there was no more restrictions to import textiles, fibers, garments from outside of the EU. That opened the door to decentralizing and shifting our textile production in EU to the Far East for, of course, cheaper production. And that was the beginning. It was just a legal switch.
And is that the biggest change you've seen in the 25 years that you've been ploughing the particular furrow that you plough?
The other big change is happening now. Legislation is now trying to really change. So if you look at the EU, they're currently developing what's coming. The next big legislation coming is the European product passport. So where every product will have to have a label and information that specifies where was this made, how was this made, is it respectful of label legislation, where can it be repaired, where can it be recycled. And so it's really trying to shift to moving to that more circular economy. The EU has declared that it wants to become the first circular economic continent. And it's beginning to put in place a lot of heavy legislation to really force both textiles and fashion brands to really be much more careful around where they source, how they source, verifying how can this be repaired? How can it be recycled? Designing so that it can be recycled. That's a big thing for designers. France has already started that. So they introduced the AGEC law 2 years ago. So this is for medium, large scale companies that have to really now specify for each product where you can recycle it, where was it made, how is it made. So pushing for more transparency and pushing for all the brands to know exactly where things are made. Because even if you contract one supplier, they might subcontract without telling you other suppliers, and this is where they need to put more audits in to verify. It's going to be a big shift, and it's going to happen in the next few years.
And presumably, it means that with all that administration that goes on around it, our clothes will end up costing more.
Potentially, it depends how that cost is absorbed. You might take away some communication cost or some, I don't know, but it's definitely becoming more data driven. And so there's a lot more data mining for the CSR teams to really find out all the information regarding this. But what it will do as well, I think the benefit of this is it will help brands strengthen their partnership with their suppliers, because they'll invest in suppliers who behave well. And they, the suppliers will want a sense of commitment as well. So I think for me, it's going to be more work, but it's a positive shift.
Yeah. One of the materials your work has been most closely associated with, and you mentioned it earlier, is mycelium. Why are you fascinated with it, Carole?
It's a magician. It's like if you want to do bioalchemy, you just work with mycelium. There are thousands of mycelium cultures. Depending on which mycelium culture you work with which food substrates you grow it on, which temperature, which humidity control, you get something else. So the mycelium will digest a material and transform it into something else. So for me, when I work with mycelium, it's on the one hand extremely exciting because you work with established protocols, but I always look at developing new protocols, so you never know what's coming. It can be frustrating because it doesn't always behave the way you'd like it to behave. So it's a little bit of kind of relationship you develop with that mycelium. But you can achieve a huge amount of interesting materials that are grown at ambient temperature very quickly over a matter of a few days. And for me, what's interesting as a maker, again, going back to making, is I was trained as a textile designer and I was trained as a maker to take an inert material. So even if it comes from a plant, let's say cotton, how do you work with cotton? But when you work with a living material, you have to start crafting not just a material, but the behavior of a living system.
Can I ask how you work with it? You work with it in different ways, I'm sure, but take the process of working with mycelium. How does it work?
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of the recent work I've produced with mycelium. It's a collection called Harvested Assemblies, which was presented at the French Saint-Étienne Design Biennale last year. And I wanted to look at how I can actually develop new approaches to woodwork and basketry when you start to design and make with mycelium as well. So with mycelium, I purchase mycelium culture, which I then keep going. So you can feed them sawdust, waste coffee ground. So I just, and I keep a stock of it. It's a bit like if you make bread, you may have your starter and you keep feeding your starter. It keeps growing. You take some, you feed it again, it keeps growing. So effectively, I have a mycelium starter, if that's one way to be simplistic around it. And then in my case, I like to explore new ways and other ways of making with it. It's established already. We know that mycelium can eat wood. We find, mycelium and mushrooms growing in forest and in wood trunks. They are the decomposers of nature. But I wanted to look at how you can actually, if you take, 2 centimeters wide bit of wood, could you then slice it and actually grow mycelium in between and double the material quantity? So out of less wood, you'd have more material. So I was looking at establishing the protocols to actually grow mycelium, but in a controlled way, both in terms of its mechanical function, because it binds the wood together, but in terms of its aesthetic as well. So I work in it's called a laminar hood. It's a scientific piece of equipment. It's effectively like a big air filtration system. So I work under these clean air conditions. So there's no contaminant that would be in the air contaminating my experiments. So when I work at small scale level, I work in petri dishes or I work under glass domes. And I inoculate the material I work with the mycelium with different protocols depending on what I'm trying to achieve. And then I let it grow, I observe it. But it's a little bit like it's a bit like, if you're a gardener, sometimes I need to increase the humidity level. So I need to add water. Sometimes it's a bit too humid. I need to remove water. So every day when I work on a project like that, I have to check the experiments, check what they are, what they need. So it's a little bit like, growing plant systems. You have to be a carer. And that's very different than when you work with an inert material. So you have to actually try and control the behavior and in this case, I was looking at controlling where the mycelium would grow and applying what we would call in traditional textile technique, a resist technique. So, and I'm not going to reveal all my secret here, but where can I stop it growing? Where can I encourage it to grow more in an area of the wood? So I was looking at developing a market tree effect with mycelium. So marquetry is normally wood in wood, and I was looking at mycelium in wood to create this sort of white patterning motifs in a wood structure. So it's very explorative, and this is what we call more curiosity-driven research or fundamental research. So you're trying to establish new protocols for making. And when I work in a living systems lab, and this is why I love having both positions, is in a living systems lab, I don't work for a client for commercial use. So I have the space to explore the real fundamental questions. It would be the same in science. You have fundamental biology research where you might look at, what happens to mitochondria when you do this to it. And later on, maybe 5 years later, it might inform the development of a medicine, which is more applied research. So the Living Systems Lab is very much that curiosity-driven space, whereas with Maison Zero, we develop ideas that will benefit eventually the LVMH group.
Okay. So that's the difference between the two, which is interesting. Can we talk about your background, Carole? Because you grew up in the French countryside. I think I'm right in saying your parents ran a flower shop?
I did. How did you find out all this? So my mother had a flower shop and my father had a greenhouse. So I grew up, at the time you had to work on a weekend. So I grew up either in a greenhouse growing plants or in a flower shop working. So I was already working with living systems in many ways. I love growing. I'm a keen gardener. I love horticulture, but that really informed a lot of my approach to design as well, because, we were effectively having to control. I mean, I remember, we had this sort of dark kind of tents effectively, so we could slow or speed up the flowering of particular plant species to be ready for a particular time. So we had already, I learned how do you control plant growth through controlling its environment. So for me, it was quite innate to know how to do this. So, I moved to then textile design, studying textile design in Paris. And in Paris on my BA, I moved into textiles because I was very creative. I loved textiles, I loved color, I loved making. But we had, at the time, it was called technology classes, where we were taught both historically and in terms of technology how textiles were made. So this is how I learned that traditionally a textile print manufacturer would be based next to a river, because it would take the water from the river to do the dyeing, the printing, and it would release all the water in the river. And this was, for me, the beginning of thinking, well, what do you mean you release the water in a river? I hadn't realized there was a real, nature being taken for granted. It's no big deal. You release very toxic water waste in rivers. That was taken for granted. It's no big deal. And, a lot more of these technologies were introduced to us. And I just felt, I don't want to be part of this. I can't be a designer if that means we're killing our rivers. So this is why I decided to do a master's degree, and I came to Central St. Martin's.
Why Central St. Martin's?
Not because it was known for its environmental kind of education, because frankly, I wanted to do it somewhere I could speak English.
Okay.
And so it was a real thing for me. I was looking at either New York or London.
Right.
It was because I wanted to improve my English as well as developing a master's degree.
And tell me, going back, because you jumped from your childhood to Paris, I'm quite interested in when you became interested in textiles.
I think I was probably always interested. My grandmother taught me knitting, crochet, and I was constantly making with textiles. I was also making with leftover flower waste from the shop. I was a very creative child. I was making with anything. And it was either bits of flowers or bits of yarns. This is what I had. So it was quite an innate, I'm a very tactile person. So for me, it was just a natural transition. I was very interested in photography and in architecture as well. But in France at the time, you had to be very good at math to go into photography or architecture. But that wasn't a requirement for textiles. So I said, okay, well, I'll go into textiles then.
Okay, so we'll spool forward to, you're at CSM. It's 1991?
Yes.
And were notions of sustainability and the stuff that you were becoming interested in, were they on the industry's radar at that point?
A little bit. So this is before internet, but you already had a few magazines. There were a few conferences. I remember going to a conference in Lyon, in France, looking at sustainability and textiles in 92. 92, of course, the Rio Summit. That was a major thing. And it felt like, I have to say, what was interesting for me in my master's degree is, again, great environment to do it. But interestingly, it's mostly my peers, my students, friends, could not understand why there was an issue. Everybody was telling me, why don't you use cotton? Why don't you use natural dyes? And I'm like, well, actually, the way cotton's grown is very problematic. Natural dyes can be done in a way that's a bit more sustainable. But if you look historically, they've used, you have to use a mordant in a process of dyeing a textile.
A mordant fixes the dye.
It opens the fibers to absorb the dyes and fixes it in the fiber. And some of the traditional historical mordant will be chromium. So extremely toxic if it's released in water. So depending on what mordant you use, you can actually be sustainable or not. But there was a big misunderstanding of why there was a need to research how to make ecological textiles. But there was a beginning of a few really interesting initiatives. So Esprit, the brand Esprit, at the time had developed an e-collection with Linda Gross, who's now in San Francisco. So there were a few kind of interesting projects at commercial scale, trying to really point the finger at that. The Rio Summit was a big deal. And I think for me, it just felt like, because it's not really understood or not acknowledged, it's another reason to really work in that space, because that's where it's really needed.
And how important was the ecologist Janine Benyus to your thinking?
She was key, because until 1997, when I first encountered Janine Benyus and her book on biomimicry and her talk, I was really looking at recycling, upcycling, looking at better ways to recover textile dye waste. So I was looking at much more mechanical, kind of local ways of doing. And I hadn't quite clicked about this notion of learning from biology, how nature makes. So for me, it was a real turning point. It was, okay, that's where the answers will be. They will be in getting a step to working with how nature works. And that's how and why I got into biodesign.
When you started, you listened to that talk from Benyus. I mean, how did your work develop from there? What were the first steps you took? It
was very difficult. It was really challenging because, you train as a traditional formal designer where you train to work on the flow, the quality of the fabric, the aesthetic, the pattern, but you're not trained at all. So I had, even purely in terms of language, I hadn't studied biology at school. I'd never read anything about biology. So my first big step was just to read. And that's still what I do now. All I do is read biology, with papers, books, and then really starting to observe, which is one of the things Janine Benyus would say is, really looking, how does, when it's springtime, I spend a lot of time in my garden looking at the structure of how leaves open. So spending a lot of time observing, understanding, and reading. So there was quite, a big deep dive in a whole new language, a whole new, aspect of knowledge, looking at the history, looking at, in the UK, there's fascinating history, botanist explorers, it's just fascinating for me to really dive into that. But translating this to design was very challenging because, it's like, I always make the parallel with cooking. But if you know how to make your grandmother's best recipe and you follow all the protocols, suddenly you have to reinvent it and make it differently. But it takes a lot of trial and error before you get it right. And so it took me some time to really get there, and particularly because, this is before I could even have access to a lab. So this is why BIOLACE was the sort of first turning point where I was trying to master a language, a creative language, to explore what biology could do without, and then after that I moved straight into, okay, now I want to actually work with biology.
And did your peers understand what you were trying to do when you started?
No. Not really. Again, at St. Martin's, there's a real respect for people to pursue their own practice and to carve their way and their journeys in many ways. But I know a lot of my colleagues at the time were even questioning why I would talk about sustainability. Why was I looking at biology? I curated a big exhibition in Paris in 2013 to really look at map these biodesign practices across the sustainability spectrum. And quite a few of my colleagues came, but when I was trying to talk to them, I could see they were like, oh. And it was a big of a sort of, it was an eye-opener for a lot of them, but it was also something, because you have to learn so much about biology. I think it's quite an effort to really understand that as well. And now I don't see that. I think now everybody, I have to say at St. Martin's, we've really moved on. The whole sort of climate change, biodiversity is integrated in our handbooks. So students have to discuss it in the duration of their studies with us. So it's been a real transformation. But it's difficult when you're not understood necessarily to know who am I talking to, how I progress with this. So I spend more time collaborating with scientists, because this is where they were interested in what a designer could make with this. What would be the future application of these biological tools? But yeah, it wasn't a straightforward journey, I can say.
You've talked about Sir John Stoulston, the Nobel Prize-winning biologist.
Sir John Stoulston.
Yeah. They were completely accepting of working with a designer. They thought this was interesting. You had to persuade them of your worth, or how did that work?
So this was actually put in place by the Medical Research Council. So there were 5 Nobel laureates paired up with 5 of us at St. Martin's to have conversations, to look at what we could, how we could respond to the scientific discovery for which they were awarded a Nobel Prize. So this was effectively framed and structured by the Medical Research Council. But there was an interest, and there was a question around what can you make with this, but not necessarily an understanding of the relationship between what design can do with biology, because at the time that was 2007, so that was even before biodesign was even acknowledged.
Throughout this conversation, the word collaboration keeps coming up. It's been absolutely vital to your practice and the way you teach, I guess.
Yeah, I think, because for me, I collaborate with a plant or a mycelium or a human. So for me, it's important that, it's not just me in my head, in my study doing something. It's always with and for someone, something, another species. So that's quite important for me. The UNESCO project we're doing in Bolivia now could not happen without this collaborative approach. I'm working with UNESCO people in Paris, UNESCO people in Bolivia. We're working with some of our teams at St. Martin's. And what we have achieved is and has only been possible because of that diversity of expertise brought together for that particular project. And that's where, collaborations are key to really change the way of doing things. If you're just isolated, then you have less impact as well.
We're drawing to the close of our time, Carole, but where would you like the textile industry to be in 25 years' time?
To be, this is the dream, to be completely recognized and valued for having led the 3rd industrial revolution in terms of sustainable production. So I would like the textile industry to have completely shifted away from intensive agriculture, 100% organic regenerative agriculture, better ways to recognize animal welfare, and to have really fully moved into microbial dye systems, no more petroleum or harsh chemistry in the industry. And that's a challenge, but that's a dream.
That's the dream. And what are your immediate plans for the future?
Continuing to work on the UNESCO project, we have another year working with the communities to help them further develop their prototypes. We've got agroforestry technicians on location, looking at developing this textile food agroforestry system. So that's going to take a lot of my time in the next year. Continuing to work on the harvested assemblies project, because I've discovered a few protocols, but I need to verify them, make them systematic and publish them. But also looking at beginning to work on writing a book.
I mean, I guess I know the subject matter, but specifically?
On living systems and how living systems inform practices, whether it's biodesign, circular design, or regenerative design, and how that way of thinking is actually the way to shape the future of ecologically centered practice.
We will look forward to that. Carole, thank you very, very much for your time. That was absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
To find out more about Carole, try carolecollet.com or go to the Maison Zero and Living Systems Labs pages on the Central St. Martin's website. You can also go to our website to hear other podcasts that I've done, to sign up to our newsletter, and to find out all about the various events we'll be running in 2026, including Material Matters Copenhagen. One more thing, it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. For as little as £3.50 a month, you can receive invites to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message, the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. So that's it for 2025. Have a very Merry Christmas and a blissfully Happy New Year. And thanks very much for listening.